Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
While there's much room for debate concerning the last days, the question is, what are we now seeing that's happening in our world? This is Mark Taylor. Welcome to Crosspoint. Barry Stagner is my guest, and he's recognized as an authority of Bible prophecy, and his latest work is The Time of the Signs. Well, thanks, folks, for joining us on this edition of Crosspoint. Glad to have you with us today. Today I have Barry Stagner with us, and we're talking about an interesting book, especially in the times we live, The Time of the Signs, and it's chronologically of the Earth's final events that we're taking a look at. And here, Barry, in this book, you're kind of using the times of the signs, as you're calling them, connecting Scripture to what's going on in our global events, global crisis, and everything else that's happening around the world. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And, we have, Mark, various Scriptures that are yet unfulfilled in various books. And so putting together a timeline is a bit of a task at times. And I think a lot of people, especially now, are wondering what's next. And so this is an effort to use the Scriptures as a foundation for walking through the future, beginning with the rebirth of the nation of Israel and what we should expect in what order as it follows. As Jesus made it pretty clear in the Olivet Discourse that there was coming a single generation in which all those things were going to come to pass that he spoke of regarding the last days. So this is an effort to piece together the various portions of Scripture, how they relate to one another, and what sequence they're going to happen in.
Now, that's the way you start off, chapter 1, and you call it Israel, God's timepiece. Now, why is Israel God's timepiece?
Well, when we look at, especially the Olivet Discourse, remember we have four disciples, two pair of fishermen brothers, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, who, after Jesus said, "You're not going to see one stone left upon another," as they were viewing the Temple Mount and grounds, and then they asked him, "What will be the signs of your coming in the end of the age?" And his answer is the Olivet Discourse, and within it, he mentions the budding fig tree, which to them they would immediately understand because the two previous days they had just walked by a fruitless fig tree. Jesus cursed it. The next day they walked by and it was dried up from the roots, and they made that observation. And the fruitless fig tree is symbolic of unbelieving Israel, and it wasn't their time to recognize the Messiah, and that's the picture that's presented from both Joel chapter 1 and Hosea as well, and Jeremiah even mentions Israel being a fruitless fig tree. So the rebirth of the nation of Israel is crucial to understanding where we are in the last days scenario. And the answer to their question was about exactly what they asked, the last days and the signs of his coming. So we can see Israel is that marker in time where we began a march towards the fulfillment of the rest of the Olivet Discourse.
Now, Barry, do you believe through the Bible? A lot of people, when we get into Bible prophecy, a lot of them are looking in the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, Ezekiel, Isaiah, some, and different parts of the Bible, Hosea, different ones. But do you believe that through the Bible, through basically most of all the chapters or something, that there is this chronological order that God follows, that he is leading us by, that goes above and beyond what the prophecy people usually teach out of?
Well, he's made some things very clear, and other things I think we can piece together with some what I call calculated speculation. And based on what we're watching now today unraveling in our world, we know that what is developing, it appears to be Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3, where all the nations of the earth are gathered in unity against Israel. And these recent events have been a very polarizing event. So we can take what we're seeing and then piece together, like Isaiah 17:1, that people like to argue that was fulfilled by Sennacherib in the 6th century BC. But the fact that there is a Damascus today tells us that the destruction of Damascus hasn't yet happened As a matter of fact, those in Syria claim that Damascus is the Earth's oldest continuously inhabited city, which basically dismisses any type of fulfillment of Isaiah 17:1. So I believe that we can look at the scriptures and see that it's possible, maybe even likely, that with what's going on now, the destruction of Damascus is next on the prophetic calendar, which would likely lead to the Ezekiel invasion of the nations named there being drawn down from the north and invading Israel. Because at the time that Zechariah is talking about, everybody's going to be against Israel. And it's interesting that the U.S. told Israel, you're running out of time. You need to wrap this thing up. The number of civilian casualties is already turning the world against you. And if you don't get it done soon, the whole world is going to be against you, in essence, is what Anthony Blinken implied. So, looking at Scripture, we can see now, because we are in an age like Daniel 12:4 tells us that, there's going to come a time. Daniel was told, seal up the vision and the prophecy, for they are for another generation. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And so Daniel didn't even know exactly what he was writing about and how it was all going to go down. But there would be a generation coming that could see it with clarity, and I think we're living in that generation.
Well, Barry, I believe always to listen for code words, if I want to say that right, from those that really aren't followers of Christ, that are just out there. But they say things that relate to the Bible, and you wonder, why did they say that? And, you mentioned Damascus. Well, Damascus is not in very good shape today because of the problems they've had in Syria. But here a few days back, when Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about, how they were going to get Hamas and wipe them out and put a stop to this, they said, if we have to go and flatten Damascus, we will. Now, why would he even say that? To even mention that word, that just kind of caught me off guard. And now, what you're saying and what is being said by the United States, I've told people we have a perfect government to back right out on Israel and not help them at all.
Well, if you think about the phrase we hear so often about Iranian proxies, this is the connection in Damascus, because you have, the Damascus airport, which Israel has bombed since October 7th multiple times, as well as the one at Aleppo. This is where we're seeing, Iranian efforts to put, hardware on the ground that would bring about the destruction of Israel. And so Israel is taking out their runways in order to keep them from delivering even maybe potentially a warhead, a nuclear-type warhead or something. But, there's also been lots of stories down through the years regarding the presence of chemical weapons that Assad has used in time past. And there's even some that believe that all the way back to Saddam Hussein's days, that his weapons cache was sent into Syria of chemical weapons. So, whatever the reason that Damascus becomes a ruinous heap and ceases from being a city, whether it's a nuclear exchange, whether it's just a chemical weapons explosion, the city of Damascus is a main pathway for the Iranians to get within 40 miles of Israel's northern border, which is a very direction that these nations that invade Israel are going to be brought down from. And you have to consider as well, you've got military presence of 3 of the 5 nations named in the Ezekiel war scenario that are already present in Syria. So I think that's why we'd see that Damascus mentioned by Netanyahu.
Chapter 2 of the book, you talk about in the days before the flood, Matthew 24:38, should be understood as the time before God poured out his wrath on the whole earth. And I'm looking here, I think at page 37, and it says that meant that Jesus is saving, that at the end of the church age, before the tribulation begins, things will be like they were in Noah's day. Then at the bottom of the page, you said at the end of the tribulation, right before the return of Christ, there will be a global economic collapse with no buying and selling, no marrying and giving in marriage. Tell us about that.
Well, if we look at what Jesus is talking about during the tribulation, there's and before, he likens that familiar phrase, it will be as it was in the days of Noah. Now, remember, he's answering the 4 disciples' questions about the signs of his coming in the end of the age. And those are two separate questions. And so he is answering each of them specifically. And one of the curious things I find in his answer to the disciples' inquiry is that he never answered the question about the destruction of Jerusalem. And the reason he didn't answer that is because it has nothing to do with the end of the age and the signs of his coming. It was a separate event that was fulfilled in 70 A.D. So he skips forward to what it's going to be like prior to the time of Great Tribulation. And when he uses that phrase before the flood, we could look at that as saying to us today that before the next time God pours out his global wrath, just like the flood was, here's what culture is going to be like. They're going to be indifferent to the signs of impending judgment. That, as in Noah's day, they were buying and selling, marrying and giving in marriage, as Luke records. And, they didn't know what was coming until the day that Noah entered the ark. And we live in just such a time today where there's kind of a business as usual attitude.
Yeah.
In spite of the clear signs that something ominous is awaiting us out there in the world.
Now, I know that you talked some to Amir Safari, which we've had on the program here as well, and I know that he's done the foreword to that book, so you and him kind of have a same look at what's going on over there?
It's an interesting situation for those, folks that are on the ground there that is just so far beyond what we can think and feel emotionally, from watching it from a distance. And, Amir's a dear friend and brother, and it's a tough time. And I've seen, I've been all over the world with them, sat many hours together, waiting between speaking engagements and all that stuff. But I've never seen him as emotional as he is right now.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely incredible the things that this little country is seeing. And, Mark, I think this is one of the interesting things about the whole prophetic scenario. Here you've got just over 8,000 square miles, and this little tiny country, so small on a world map, you have to write the name in the Mediterranean, is the focal point of the whole world. And the reason for that is that he told Solomon, my name will be in this place forever. I will hear prayers made in this place, is how he responded to Solomon's building of a temple at its dedication. And, so this is a place where the Lord has placed his name. So we see the spiritual component introduced through that fact that this is spiritual at its heart. And even though many of the vehicles used to advance, the anti-Semitism we're seeing are flesh and blood, the battle at its core is spiritual.
Yeah. The book has got a lot of excellent information in it. In fact, what you're talking about is just, your book is a hot topic already, and I'm sure when you was putting this book together, this wasn't what you were thinking was coming, or knew that it was coming, of course. We just had a few days back, Jan Markell's people in doing a conference here. So your book is very timely, and very timely name on it, The Time of the Signs. Just before you get out of, I believe, chapter 2 there, on chapter 2 on page 40, you talk about we live in a time when people are told their feelings can define their gender and other areas. You said the truth of science crowd doesn't trust the science. They place feelings above facts, even when there comes to undeniable biological, physiological realities. And you said how far astray mankind has got from God's original design of creating male and female, as it tells in Genesis 1. What we are seeing happening today is part of the thoughts and the intents of a man's heart being evil continually as it was in the days of Noah. And this is exactly what the Lord said, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man. So we're being set up, are we not?
Oh, without question. I think one of the interesting passages from the book of Isaiah, which I think maybe 520 is quoted in that chapter, I believe, where evil and good have exchanged definitions, is that the Lord talks about the fact in chapter 2 that there's going to come a time where he's going to rise and shake the earth. And then he gives specific details about much of what's going to happen in that time, including, he said, I will give you children for your princes, which is an interesting phrase that I've always kind of looked at as being figurative, of incompetent leadership or unqualified people rising to power and, kind of leading the world astray, so to speak. But I think it's curious now that we're seeing this in more of a literal sense, where children are telling their parents what their gender is, and parents are bowing to the wishes of children. And, here we've got the face of the climate change movement is a young girl who was, I think she was 16 when she came onto the world scene, and, has absolutely no training or expertise in the area for which she is the international spokesperson. And so now we've got children taking the place and roles of adults. We've got evil called good and good called evil. We've got leadership around the world that very clearly shows they're completely ignorant of facts and history, including, the biological facts today that have long been respected and acknowledged by cultures all over the world, that men are men and women are women. Here now we live in a time where these things are out the window, and it's whatever you think or feel, and facts and truth have now become subjective instead of objective like they've been for millennia.
Well, folks, stay with us. We're going to be back with more in just a moment. This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today.
For 60 years, Crater College has been empowering students to soar to new heights, from agriculture to education, to business, sports, and the newest technologies. Crater always has something interesting going on. I'm Adam Winkler of KNEO Radio. Join me each week as I talk to a different person from Crater College about what's been happening and what's coming up next. It's the Insider's Guide to all things Crater. Subscribe today to the This Week in Crater College podcast, available from the Sky High Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. Today with me I have Barry Stagner, and Barry has put out an interesting book, The Time of the Signs. Now, Barry, you put out other stuff. You've been an authority in Bible prophecy teaching, different things that you do. So if somebody wanted to know more about this book that has just come out, or maybe something else that you've done, how would they go about doing that?
Through my website, you can go to barrystagner.com, and it's got a blog there, as well as all of my books are available there. Now, if you can go to the church website, we had kind of an interesting situation of late with our church. We've had to move, and so we moved from one city to another. And for 21 years we were known, or 22 years we were known as Calvary Chapel Tustin, but we had to move cities. So now we're in Costa Mesa, California. So our church web address is cctustin.org, and Tustin is Tustin. And our website is there, messages are there, all the information about books. And Mark, if I could, I'd just encourage people. The book is actually released on January 16th.
Correct. And
one of the reasons I think to get out there and get the word out is because the way the brick-and-mortar stores operate these days is they use kind of a software package called BookScan, and they track pre-sale numbers, and that's what Target and Walmart, Barnes & Noble, and any other brick-and-mortar bookstore or businesses that carry books will use to determine whether or not they're put it on the shelf. So pre-sale is super, super important. So if anybody would find it in their heart to grab the book at Amazon, that would help put those numbers up there, where I think the people who aren't necessarily shopping on Christian websites would see a book by a title that would hopefully grab their attention.
Yeah.
So that's how you can connect with me, all the teachings at the church, as well as all my books.
Well, of course, I got a review copy, but it is a very attractive book, and it is talking about what people are thinking about, so it's a very timely book. So anyway, I believe it'll be a big help to people. Now, speaking of people, Barry, you talk about, and you say, there's readers that they're skeptical of prophetic interpretations going on with current events and stuff. What do you tell people like that? Because it's obvious what's going on, but some people still, they don't want to swallow that.
Yeah, it's probably, as I travel the world, it is without question one of the top two comments I hear from people. One is we can't find a Bible teaching church, and two is nobody's teaching Bible prophecy. And, I think a lot of it is, the second part at least, is intimidation and fear, because there is so much that we don't know for sure, but we can use the whole of Scripture to calculate and speculate as to what's coming as far as chronology and all that. And, I think, as an example, I don't think any of us, we knew that the nations in the Ezekiel war were going to be drawn down from the far north. How it winds up that there's only a protest against it, no military action against it. How was that going to come about? And how were these nations, Turkey, Russia, Iran, Sudan, and Libya, how were they going to find themselves in a presence on the northern border of Israel militarily without the rest of the world reacting to it? And now we can see that the answer was ISIS. These countries came in under the guise of destroying ISIS in Syria, and now yet here we are, some years later, and there's still a military presence of the Turkish army, the Iranian army, as well as the Russian presence there, and the U.S., of course. But I like to say that the surest form of prophetic interpretation is fulfillment. So I think a lot of people shy away from it just because, there's so many opinions on it and so many interpretations about it, and they just as soon stay away from it. But, I think the most important thing, Mark, is that Bible prophecy, or prophecy within the Bible, is what distinguishes the Bible from every other religious writing. I mean, the Lord knows yesterday and today, and He knows tomorrow in the same way. He sees everything and has revealed it to us. As Pastor Chuck Smith used to say, it's like watching a parade. We're sitting on the curb, and we can only see what's in front of us. God sits on high, and He can see the whole parade at the same time. So He has told us that here's how things are going to end. Here's where they're going. He told us how things began. He told us how they're going to end. And, all the different things, like I said earlier, some people say, oh, no, the Isaiah 17:1 has already been fulfilled, or this particular passage is figurative, and all that. So I think a lot of people are just intimidated by this subject. And, I've told over the years, as I've had a chance to talk to different pastors, and the question comes up about not teaching the book of Revelation. And what would I say to them? And I always say the same thing. It's no different than any other book. You got to study hard and dig in and dig deep and pray. It's a book that comes with an outline for the things which are, the things which are coming after this. And then there's this pattern that continues throughout the book of Revelation, where you see the repeated Greek phrase metatauta, after these things. So you're given a chronology. So I think a lot of people are just intimidated by this subject. And there are those with the ostrich syndrome. They don't want to hear this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which kind of is prophetic in and of itself. That, Paul said there'd come a time where people don't want to put up a sound doctrine. No. In 2 Timothy chapter 4. And they'll heap up for themselves teachers and turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. And that's some of what we're seeing today also, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I'll just kind of throw this in from the side. So I'm always watching other stations in the area, listening to them, seeing what they're talking about. There's one big station in the area. The gentleman that owns the station professes to be a Christian, but he does a lot of things I don't think lean that way. But I noticed the other day on a talk show he had, someone had called in and was talking about the vaccine, and they were saying, it wasn't a good thing and this going on. He just cut them off and turned them off. Well, the next caller called in and wanted to know why he did that, and he said, well, because they don't know the science and they don't understand it, and everybody needs to get to. And I'm thinking, but you don't have that right. We're supposed to be the independent here to let people understand, but you're seeing these kind of things happening. And in your book, you say something in here. Let's see, it's on page number 49. I want to read a piece of it. You said, we are seeing the signs come to pass, and the number of God deniers is growing by leaps and bounds. then the only rightful conclusion must be that the day of the Lord is at hand. You say we live in a time when most intolerant people in society are those who demand Christians tolerate whatever they think is true. And then you just go on to say, today Christianity is the one religion that is viewed as negative by many. It is the one belief system that infuriates people like no other. People are more tolerant of Islam than they are of Christianity. It's pretty good.
Well, you think about what just happened this past week, that it was announced by the vice president that there is now going to be a concerted effort to combat Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And, here we've got anti-Semitism rising by leaps and bounds. We've got, universities like Harvard who are protesting what Israel is doing and condemning them, and there's hundreds of thousands of people in the streets around the world. And what is the concern of the government? Not to protect the Jews, but to make sure those, and I thought some of the language was interesting, those who are Muslim or those who are perceived as Muslim need our protection.
Yeah.
And, so they're talking about just the Arab peoples and Muslims in general. But there's no mention about the concern when we've got students hiding in libraries, locking themselves away from protesters for fear of their lives. And there's no mention of that. And, again, you've got this twisted and contorted perspective that's happening, from the highest levels of government running down through our universities and now out into the streets where, people are tearing down posters of children who have been kidnapped by Hamas. And we've heard of the heinous things that have happened. And yet, you've got this mentality, I think, that is in preparation for the tribulation, to where there's just a turning away from anything that God is for. And, one of the things I think that's important for all Christians to remember, Mark, is that in the book of Ezekiel, we're all familiar with, or most of us, I should say, are familiar with the Ezekiel 37 to 39 scenario.
Correct.
The dry bones coming back into the land and God restoring the Jews into their national homeland. But if you back up a chapter in Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 20, I think, to 22, the Lord said, I'm not bringing you back, and again, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not bringing you back for your sake. I'm bringing you back for my holy name's sake, because every day that the Jews were outside of their national homeland, the Lord's name was profaned. And he even said in that passage, the people of the nations where I've driven you are saying, these are the people of God, and they're outside of their homeland. So, I think we need to be very careful about choosing sides in this, especially siding against Israel, because the truth of the matter is, God said, I'm bringing them back for my name's sake. And that's why they're back in the land, because he gave it to them by everlasting and unconditional covenant. So, but yeah, Mark, it's just crazy, the things that are used to be normal in our country are now viewed as negative, and much of the country is turning against it.
Yeah. Now, Barry, before we go into this next segment here, again, tell the listener today about this book, The Time of the Signs. How do they need to, what's the best way they can go about, because it's not going to be out for a few more weeks. So how will, is best for them to go ahead and get this process started to having this book ready when it does get out? Well,
the book is available on Amazon through any online bookseller. I think Barnes & Noble and Target and all of them already have it in their online stores. But again, what I mentioned earlier about the importance of pre-sale is, the real, because the people, who are shopping online, they're going to look for what they're looking for. I mean, they're going to look for, just the target. They'll type in the name of the book or the name of the author, and so they won't have any opportunity to be exposed to this. So if you go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target or any of these online booksellers in pre-sale, and all of these things are reported to, as I said earlier, BookScan. And then when the retailers are looking at these numbers, by the time it's the release date, that will determine whether or not they're going to put it on their shelves. So, I think it's interesting, as you mentioned a little bit ago, the timing of this and the fact that we are living in, of course, the title is a play on words, we are living in a time where there are signs all around us.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, folks, we're going to be back with more with Barry right after this.
Your future begins today. Your new second chance just arrived. Welcome to Fresh Grace. Welcome to New Hope. 91.7 The Word. Radio that impacts your future.
Are you walking in everything God has for you? Hi, I'm Pastor Gary Culp, and I'd like to invite you to check out the Exceedingly Abundant Ministries podcast, available from the Sky High Podcast Network. This 30-minute weekly Bible study will give you time to grow spiritually and get to know God and His Word on a deeper level. God has more in store for you than you ever realized. Listen to Exceedingly Abundant Ministries today and learn about how God can do more with your life than you ever imagined.
Welcome back to Crosspoint. Interesting conversation today. We're having Barry Stagner, new book, The Time of the Signs, a very timely book. You know, I'm looking at chapter 4 here, page 64, and it says, when it comes to the last days, we can no longer limit an understanding of the word church to mean born-again believers. Yes, the church is made up of people, but these days it is not just people who are congregated on Sundays in a building set aside for the purpose of having a church service. So what are you trying to say here about, you know, we're no longer under that word of the church kind of, you know, things have changed somewhat?
Well, the church has, in a lot of ways, become there's an old country preacher named Vance Havner, who had his homespun wisdom repeated by many pastors. And one of the things that I heard him say that was very descriptive of the day in which we live is he said in the last days the church has become the old Adam improvement society. And what he obviously means by that is that, you know, the church is all about improving your status in life, having, you know, things go positively for you, and maintaining a positive outlook and life experience and all that. And its focus will be shifted away from the church's one and only commission given by Jesus, which is to go to the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And so, you know, now we're having this, as Paul prophesied of in 2 Thessalonians, this defection from truth or apostasy. And it goes right in line with what we mentioned earlier with Paul's writing in his last letter, in the last chapter of his last letter before he was beheaded, to Timothy, about a time coming where sound doctrine will not be endured, but fables. And that word, our preferred, that word fables is can also be translated as fabrications or things that people make up. And this is a lot of what we're seeing today. And you hear, you know, comments made by pastors who are well known and have huge congregations about unhitching from the Old Testament or becoming more culturally sensitive or, you know, things of this nature. And this is what the point is in that particular chapter, recognizing that prior to the last day scenario, moving into the tribulation age, there's going to be a mass defection from truth within the church. So, and, you know, the church is the only salt and light that the world has, according to Jesus. And when we've lost our Savior, we become trampled underfoot by men, as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. And that's exactly, I think, what we're seeing today, that much of the church has been trampled by worldliness and a desire to not seem culturally irrelevant or insensitive to the trends within culture. But we're never meant to be a part of this world. We're always meant to be distinct from it. So, I mean, everybody knows not every person who goes to church is a Christian. Not every place that calls itself a church is necessarily one that is preaching the word, which is the counsel that Paul gave Timothy in 2 Timothy 4 regarding those days that were coming where sound doctrine would not be endured. He said, preach the word. In or out of season, preach the word. And that's the point the chapter's making.
Even going from that chapter to chapter 5, I want to kind of connect two here together. So at the end of chapter 4, I'm looking at page 74, it says, we're living in the last stage of the church history, and the parallels between the church at Laodicea and the postmodern church are undeniable. Then we just flip right over here into chapter 5, and you say, when the church is no longer has a purifying and preserving influence on the world, it's no longer bringing glory to God, it seems safe to say that the timing is right for the world to transition back to the 70 weeks of Daniel and to experience the fulfillment of the 70th and final week of the tribulation. While the rapture of the church is being taught, is being imminent, the day and the hour are unknown. There are many clues that tell us this event, it's coming, and that's what the chapter 5 starts, the rapture. There's a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, there is, and I think it's interesting that we hear so often, especially for rapture critics or prophecy critics, that we're told that nobody knows the day or the hour. But just like with any passage, you have to keep reading. Jesus said, "But as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man comes." And then he's giving, this incredible description of what life and culture is going to be like. So it's not that we are without information regarding the timing of the catching away that Paul wrote about in 1 Corinthians 15, that moment and twinkling of an eye experience. And so, we're not completely ignorant, even though we don't know the day or the hour. We are watching from the rebirth of the nation of Israel, the mass defection of truth within the church, the gathering of the nations, the coalition force that's going to invade Israel from the north. The protesting nations are making overtures for diplomatic relations to be established with Israel, and that would be the Sheba and Dedan of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Those are the Arab Gulf states, and we've watched with the Abraham Accords and all that. So all these things are falling into place. And what we know from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is that we have to be taken out of the way for the lawless one to be revealed. And the lawless one is the title of the Antichrist. So it's not that we're completely without information as to when, generally we should be looking for these things, because Jesus would later go on and say, when you see these things begin to happen, know that your redemption draws near. And I think that particular portion, he's talking to the Jews, and their redemption nationally is drawing near. And therefore, since we have to be out of the way, the purifying influence of the church, the preserving influence of the church via the power of the Holy Spirit, we have to be taken out of the way for the lawless one to be revealed, who will make that 7-year covenant with Israel and many nations that's reported in Daniel chapter 9. It just seems as though we should be rapture ready, as the saying goes, for he could come for us at any moment.
Yeah. Chapter 16 of the book, page 114, you say the only definite facts we know about the identity of the Antichrist is that he will raise to power out of the revived Roman Empire. It is likely that neither he nor the second beast, the false prophet, will be Jews, because both of them will persecute the Jews. This raises the question, why would Jews be willing to work with a Gentile ruler who offers them a peace covenant? And that's just about what you were just talking about right there. They will do that, though, will they not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about what happened when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I mean, there were the term Messiah or Mashiach in Hebrew was being thrown around all over the place. And that descriptive phrase or term used, in reference to Donald Trump. And so, those who are going through, whoever the individual is, and the cronies that he has, the Revelation 17 talks about, whoever comes up with a plan for them to rebuild their temple is going to be followed. And, this is the whole, the Orthodox movement, and it's gaining strength now, especially with this unifying element. That's one thing Amir and I had talked about, and I know he's mentioned it on some of his YouTube programs, that Israel was much like the United States prior to October 7th. They were divided. There were protests going on over this and that, and mostly the judicial reform and all the things in the country was hugely split. And now here they are united as a nation and be looking for leadership. Here you've got a man that's some would compare it to an Israeli Donald Trump in Netanyahu. He's very aggressive, strong voice, doesn't mince any words, and is pro-country, which is kind of bizarre that that's become a negative in these last days, to have any type of national pride. But, they're already looking for somebody to bring all this stuff to an end. Whatever nationality he is, I don't think that's necessarily going to be a concern to them. If somebody can bring peace to Jerusalem, they're going to follow that guy at least for a time.
Chapter 8 of the book, you say here on page 137, the good news is that the church will not be here for the portion of the tribulation for multiple reasons, and you give that. Now, some people want to argue this point, and this has become a big point of discussion. Is the church going to be going halfway through, part way, all the way through, or getting out of here? This is something that you bring out in the book.
One of the things that people often overlook is that God's wrath isn't just earthquakes and hailstones of fire mingled with blood. God has what's called his consequential wrath as well. And we see that mentioned in multiple places, including in Hebrews, where, there's a group who wandered and griped in the wilderness, who the Lord said, I swore in my wrath, they will not enter my rest. And so his wrath was manifested in this life consequences. But it wasn't the cataclysmic wrath of God. He didn't, because they, were griping and complaining, he didn't hit them with hailstones and an earthquake or the earth swallowing them up. The consequences of their decision, or the universal law of sowing and reaping. They didn't want anything to do with his plan, so they didn't enter his rest. And that's the consequential wrath of God. And I think one of the consequences for the world is the removal of the church, and they've wanted to get rid of us. And we now are the negatives in the world. We're standing against the greater good of all people being equal and having equal value. And people have equal value in the eyes of God. I mean, he's not willing that any of us should perish, but there are things that God has prohibited in his word within the realm of human behavior. And we are the ones who have the book that says there's certain sexual activities that are restricted to the married, or all sexual activity is restricted to the married, and there are certain sexual activities that he has prohibited. And so we have this influence in the world that the world would just as soon get rid of. So, when you look at what happens and you take 1 Thessalonians 4, that the lawless one cannot be revealed until the hindering force of the Spirit through the church is taken out of the way. And then you see the tribulation begins in Revelation chapter 6, verse 2, with the lawless one riding onto the world scene. That's the first thing that happens. So that's the beginning of the tribulation.
Yeah.
And he rides onto the world scene with a covenant in hand. That's what the bow in his hand is symbolic of, that covenant with Israel. So if what opens the tribulation is an act of God's wrath in the consequential form, and we do not have an appointment with wrath, we cannot be here for any of the tribulation. And the whole, Daniel talks about the time of indignation, and the Hebrew word translated indignation is the same word for wrath. So if the whole, according to Daniel, if the whole 70th week is a time of God's wrath, and 1 Thessalonians 5:9 says the church doesn't have an appointment with wrath, then we can't be here for any of it.
Yeah.
So, for the pre-wrathers, those who say, well, we'll be taken out before God's wrath, I would agree, as long as you look at the rise of the Antichrist to world power as being an act of God's wrath, which begins the tribulation. So the whole thing is God's wrath. We won't be here for any of it, and I think the Scripture backs that up.
You close the book out. Chapter 12, by the way, is the last chapter. And in chapter 12, page 197, you couldn't have done a better job from how the book lines up with what's going on. You said, I believe it is time for the church to go home because the combatants of the Ezekiel war are assuming their positions and forming coalitions.
Yes,
that's kind of an interesting way, but that's what you say right there as you go out of chapter 12 into the book.
And we are we're watching it happen.
Yeah, there's
And,
no doubt.
it's amazing. It's an incredible time to be alive. And to see these things written, 2,700 years ago, and they're happening, just falling like dominoes right in front of our eyes. And I think that's one of the things for us to recognize that, Jesus opens the book of Revelation with, that these things are going to happen quickly. And, what the Greek word translated as quickly or shortly in some translations means in quick succession once they begin. And just think about how the world has changed since October 7th.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole world is different than it was on October 6th.
Yeah.
The world is polarized. There's acts of violence and people running for their lives, Jews running for their lives. There's Stars of David being painted on homes and businesses of Jews in countries all over the world. Here in the States, you've got Jews hiding in libraries, as we mentioned earlier, for fear of their lives, and people taking off their kippahs when they're out in public because they don't want to be recognized as a Jew. I mean, just everything's different than it was 30 days ago.
Yeah.
So things are happening fast.
Yes, they are. Well, again, tell people how they can find this book just coming out, and tell people how they can do that.
Well, again, you can find it on any online bookseller. If you go to Amazon, you can find it there. Just type in my name, Barry Stagner, and there'll be a group of books that come up. This one that's being offered for pre-sale is called The Time of the Signs, and we are living in a time that is a sign-rich environment. It's released on January 16th, but you'll get it probably on the 17th or 18th. But I would just add this. I would really appreciate any who would go and pre-order the book, because my hope is that this will get into the stores. I think the people who need to hear it the most are going to be exposed to it the least, unless it's out there in the store where they'll walk by. When it's on the shelf and somebody says, The Time of the Sign, that's an interesting title. What's this book all about? And
exactly.
The main point is to get them to pick it up and look at it. So,
exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Barry, for being with us today here on Crosspoint.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the time.
Great interview today, folks. Very timely interview. Man, you need to maybe look more at this book yourself and see what all the things that have been put in there, because it's very, very timely from the way we live. The other book I hold in my hand is always timely, the Holy Bible. This book tells you what's going to happen before it happens, after it happens, and when more's coming to happen. It's the very inspired words of God that directs you and shows you what eternity holds for everybody that'll just follow the words that are contained in this book. Folks, be sure and join us next time as we again discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week. Allow God to use you for His purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week: Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.
Never miss your favorite show again. For more than 30 years, KNEO has been bringing you great Bible teachers on a local and national level. And now, we've made it easier than ever to hear from these great men and women of God. KNEO's entire lineup is now available to listen anytime, anywhere, through our website. Go to kneo.org/podcast to see all the options. You can search for programs alphabetically, or you can select individual categories like culture, kids, leadership, or music. We even have a category just for locally produced programs, so you can hear from pastors and spiritual leaders located right here in the 4-state area. And all these resources are absolutely free. KNEO's mission is to get God's Word in front of you, and this is one of the ways we do it. Give it a try today. Go to kneo.org and click on the podcast tab to get started.
Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri is proud to be sponsoring this portion of broadcasting on KNEO. Owned by Judy and Danny Harper, Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri specializes in French Bulldogs. For more information, the phone number is 417-628-3083.